The NORM project is a KA2 project of the 2019 project generation. That means when we initially started the project, we didn't know that a pandemic was going to come, and neither did we know what the new Erasmus landscape would look like. So as we continue with our presentation, keep that in mind, that the project ideas, the premise, is based in 2018-2019. The NORM Consortium, trying to find ways, identify bottlenecks, and make suggestions on how to make more students mobile, consists of several partners: the University of Marburg, the University of Barcelona from Spain, Aristotle University of Thessaloniki from Greece, ELTE from Budapest, the University of Alcalá, who will be co-hosting today's session. Thank you, Nacho, for joining us. UVSQ from Versailles in France, VMU from Kaunas, the European University Foundation, as well as the Erasmus Student Network. Now, what do we have in store for us today? We are already at the welcome and introduction part of the presentation, hosted by the University of Marburg. After that, we'll give you a very brief overview of the intellectual outputs that the NORM project produced. Essentially, there are 6 outputs that can be divided into categories. The first 3 outputs are research-based, informing the curricular design guide, as well as the course catalog matching tool that are the outputs number 4 and 6. After that, Nacho will give a presentation on the new mobility map of Europe. With the new Erasmus generation, the opportunities for mobilities are manifold. We have more opportunities than we used to have before. And after that, we'll focus on the curricular design guide, which is at the heart of today's session. Eventually, we will have a group work about implementing curricular mobility in our degree programs. Essentially, what we are planning on doing is preparing with you a sort of negotiation setting where we discuss what must be negotiated, what cannot be negotiated, what must be said, and what should be said. So, when the project idea for the NORM project was born, the target number was 20% of graduate students having spent at least 3 months abroad and achieved a minimum of 15 ECTS. As I mentioned, the numbers are different nowadays. So this is back in 2018 and 19. The priorities for the new Erasmus generation, the possibilities that we have, blended intensive programs, blended programs, third cycle mobilities, all of that we didn't know at the time was going to happen for sure. We could only have a hint, so to speak. So these new mobility opportunities in many ways inform the new mobility landscape that we have. Thinking about Erasmus as a sort of trendsetter, setting the baseline for international mobility, these new mobility formats, we think, are going to prevail on the long run. So the NORM project essentially is a 2-legged project. The initial goal was to assist higher education institutions in improving the quantity and the quality of student mobility. And there are essentially 2 legs for that. On the one hand, the curricular matching tool that was designed to help students match courses. And in the process, we developed additional use cases. So cases where faculty coordinators, for example, would use the tool to pre-check, so to speak, a student's course matching prior to the actual completion of the learning agreement, especially the digital learning agreement. For example, what we found is that in many of our partner universities of the consortium, while the Erasmus interinstitutional agreement is quite clear and it's based on an ISCAT code, the actual mobilities pick courses in particular out of a variety of different fields. For example, if you have a student training to become a teacher, that student eventually will take classes from different fields. However, technically speaking, he goes abroad on one interinstitutional agreement. Now, the coordinator eventually, or the ECTS coordinator, signs the learning agreement for that student. The question is how, and we keep in mind we're having a number of students, right? Several hundred students eventually. How do the coordinators communicate with each other so that only one coordinator can feel confident when signing the learning agreement? The curricular matching tool, for example, offers a use case, a scenario where the coordinators can communicate with the student and amongst each other on a table that the student has produced to exchange that kind of information. Also, coordinators eventually are able to produce sample course matching, course lists, not in a one-on-one way, but stacking each other. Like if you consider table A and table B of a learning agreement, what we're looking at is not the one-on-one comparison, but the group comparison that we have table A and table B. So coordinators can set up sample or best practice, so to speak, tables that students can eventually import into their learning agreement. So what we set out was to look at structural and systemic barriers towards student mobility. We'll talk a little bit about the research that we did in preparation for the curricular matching tool and the design guide, finding that structural barriers are only one side of the bottlenecks that keep students from being mobile. The other aspect, not covered within the scope of the norm project, were, for example, personal issues. Okay. So, as I mentioned, we looked at curricular design in various ways, and eventually, this is what we're focusing on today, is the European Curricular Design Guide. And Nacho from the University of Alcalá will present that later on. We'll do our exercise on that. The curricular matching tool, the IT solution fostered towards students as well as coordinators. I mentioned that already. Okay. So the norm project essentially has three intellectual outputs. Let me give a summary of the first intellectual output, which was a desk research report. So basically a report on the literature that's out there already. And in a nutshell, what the report found was that amongst structural barriers, there are also very personal reasons that authors mention for students not going abroad or not being mobile. Among them are the three most prominent: funding issues. Mobilities are very expensive. The fear of prolongation, that is, students fear that if they go abroad, they have to study longer, and depending on the costs of studying at home, at the home university, that is a very legitimate fear. And the language level. The idea is that the language level itself, in the language of the host institution, students don't feel or are not as comfortable with, as well advanced as they should be. And this basically reflects back on another issue that we discovered, is the level of English taught classes at the universities. That is, as we probably find, it's not sufficient. IO2 then continued based on the desk research with a quantitative analysis. And Ramon, I saw you somewhere in the participants list. Could you summarize the findings of IO2 real quick?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So departing from what Johannes has been summarizing, we construct two different surveys. One for students and the other one for staff. These surveys were launched in 2020, okay, and they were responded by a quite significant number of students. For instance, almost 3,000 students answered this survey for students, and about 200 staff members answered these surveys. And these surveys were distributed among the different universities that formed the consortium of this project. Okay, so we obtained some results to provide evidence on the perceptions of both students and staff on institutional, structural, and academic barriers to international student mobility. Okay, and the first result that we obtain is that, as has been already stressed by the existing literature on this field, is that income constraints come first as a main barrier for mobility. But so that's what we obtained. But what is important to stress now is that the second most important barrier stressed by both students and the staff was that academic issues or structural issues or institutional issues, or mainly academic issues in this particular case, was a major barrier for mobility, for the mobility of a student. So income is okay first, but then after that, we found that academic barriers were very important. Okay, so once we know that academic barriers were important, the point is which kind of academic barriers. Okay, and we provided in the surveys different possibilities, and according to the results, the most important barrier for international students' mobility was the possibility that mobility abroad could prolong studies at the home university. And this was stressed by both the students and the staff. Okay? And then among the students, a second potential barrier was the difficulty in credit recognition between the host institution and the home university. Okay, so we had, of course, other barriers, but the first one, prolongation of studies, was the most important, and for the students, the second one was also difficulties in credit recognition. Okay, so and this led us to consider, let's say, whether studies prolongation or credit recognition could be connected to a potential poor institutional design, such as weak incorporation of mobility in the curricula, or whether or university regulations, or problems with the learning agreement management could explain these difficulties. And we asked for that, and we obtained interesting results on this issue, on these issues as well. Okay, so our survey provided important or interesting insights on the barriers for mobility, stressing academic barriers. Okay, so these surveys are available. If you are interested in, we can provide you. But I would stress as a final point that certain academic barriers are perceived more important than others, and they are sometimes connected with matching courses between the home and the host universities, and so this makes important to implement tools for avoiding these potential problems that we found. Okay, so that's all from my side. If you have any question, of course.
Thank you so much, Ramon. And let me pick up on that, because that is something that translated right into intellectual output 3. Automatic recognition is an issue. So eventually what we set out was the curriculum matching tool, right? We wanted to design a curriculum matching tool. And in the third output, what we did, we interviewed 22 colleagues from the network, various positions, the majority of them being international relations officers. However, we also interviewed people from a more political level, right, as well as students. And we asked them, among other questions, for example, now in terms of course catalog, when do you typically publish your course catalog information? It's a simple question, right? And what we found that, well, in order to prepare a learning agreement or a meaningful learning agreement before mobility, right? Something, if it's reliable, that keeps a lot of that fear of prolongation that Ramon just mentions in check. We found that many institutions only publish their course catalog rather late, compared to or when taken in the context of the necessities of an international mobility. So, for example, an institution that starts its winter term in October only publishes its course catalog in August. And now when you think about a mobility flow, by the time the students actually preparing the learning agreement, or even beforehand, right, the students do not know for sure which classes, which courses and modules are going to be offered. On another level, we asked ourselves how do we compare courses? And the most obvious indicator in terms of Erasmus would be the ICECAD codes. So the question, again, quite simple, was, do you use an ICECAD code indicator in your course catalog information as you prepare the course catalogs for publishing? And, well, almost no university does so. That means, essentially, even if you put together all of the course catalog information and you create different tables from home university and potential host universities, what you have there, you cannot as easily, or as of right now, compare it via the ICECAD code. The ICECAD code, however, is an essential element of every interinstitutional agreement. So eventually, almost all of the coordinators that we spoke to support the implementation of a tool that helps students to more easily compare course catalogs as they prepare their mobilities. In addition, we talked to representatives from ANECA and AKIN, which are accreditation agencies from Germany and Spain, and they do evaluate degree programs. However, in conversation with them, we found that they too look at, for example, funding and language levels as obstacles towards international mobility, right? Okay. So essentially, while structural barriers are instrumental in dissuading students from partaking in international mobilities, personal barriers cannot be disregarded when assessing barriers comprehensively. What we're saying with this is that these personal levels, they persist. And during our interviews, we found that many interview partners have an assumption that students or young people, for example, live at home longer than they did in the past. Now, this is, of course, also during the pandemic, right? But assuming that there is a change, that people stay at home longer, they move out at 25 or 30, whereas in the past they would typically move out much earlier, at least in Germany. It is my understanding that's what's happening right now, in part of course, because accommodation is such a big issue. It's very, very expensive. Then the question is, if you don't have to be as independent in the first step, right? Going to a university in your hometown, the more difficult it gets when you have to consider going abroad on an international mobility. So, and something else of the personal dimension that we want to consider. So IO4, quite briefly, we already talked about that. And curricular matching tool that gives various use scenarios, and ideally universities provide an interface to their course catalog data. Now, most of you are, I assume, familiar with the EWP implementation that we're working on right now, digital learning agreements, digital interinstitutional agreements, and we see how that is struggling. As evidence, we have the deadlines that have been postponed, right? Whereas right now we're talking about digital learning agreements being completed if both partners are potentially able to do so. What I'm saying is that with many partners that we spoke to, many partners in the consortium use, for example, a third-party software to administer EWP needs, like the digital learning agreement. So you have a parallel system there. In comparison, however, the implementation of the curricular matching tool or the interface, the OCAPI, OCC API, that was programmed for this, and that touches upon the very heart of a university's, of a higher education institution's IT infrastructure. So in comparison to EWP, I'd say that this implementation is even more of a challenge. Okay. And testing the curricular matching tool, I think, Alina, can you share some thoughts on that?
So IO5, the goal of IO5 is the testing of the curriculum matching digital tool that was developed in IO4. It's supposed to pilot the prototype of the IT solution developed by IO4 and EU5. The goal is to produce a report that includes the results of the pilot and to also have an assessment of the scalability of the tool for the future development and rollout of the IT tool, which of course is really important. In addition to that, we want IO5 to produce information on how the digital solution can help higher education institutions to embed mobility opportunities in their curricula. So those were the goals that are set out for IO5. In response to those goals, 4 different phases of the pilot were come up with, starting with an update of the use cases and a production of a technical manual for IT specialists in the partner universities, so something that they would actually have in hand to use the results of IO4, the tool. In addition to that, in phase 2, there would be a webinar training, the development of a webinar training for IT specialists. In phase 3, the pilot phase would go to the partner universities and the testing would happen in real environment to test functionality and usability. And then in phase 4, we would hope to get an assessment of the scalability requirements and, of course, a final report of the testing phase. As part of the phases, we would implement feedback from the consortium partners. A use case is a description of how a person who actually uses that processor system will accomplish a goal. So with an update of the use cases, the IT developers would go into a second round of development in order to implement strategies to improve the first prototype of the tool. And again, the goal would be a technical manual for IT developers so they can properly use this tool. The pilot phase in a partner university would have as its goal, which I kind of already elaborated on, to use the tool in a real environment to collect real data of how things go along while the tool is being used. This would be in close cooperation between ELTA and the partner universities. And of course, the key stakeholders of the pilot would be the Erasmus Plus coordinators, students, credit transfer committees, and IT developers. So a network round of those key stakeholders working together. One of the major goals is to really analyze scalability of the norm tool, which means that we want to make sure that the ability of the IT tool is up to par to meeting the needs of the increasing number of users and external services in a way that is predictable in terms of performance. So we're not surprised with errors that will come up with the increase of the scale of use. This would include an increase in entry volume and an increase in users, and see how much the IT tool can actually handle. With that, we can also predict the results with a further increased demands of the IT tool. And all this will be summarized in the final report of IO5. Thank you.
Thank you, Alina.
You're welcome.
So basically, IO5 is the corrective for the norm tool, and as that, especially looking on the IT challenges that we experienced in prototyping the curriculum matching tool, a quite important role. Let's now move on to IO6 and the presentation on the new mobility map of Europe. That is something that I'm actually quite looking forward to, because with the new Erasmus generation, we have to find new ways of doing, or we are able to find new ways of doing mobilities beyond your standard one semester exchange. And eventually what we're planning to do, Nacho, right, is we want to implement these into our curricula. And that is something, well, we have experience with your one semester mobility window. That's probably in a bachelor program, your fifth semester. But we don't have that much experience with implementing in terms of credit mobility, right? Not just any type of mobility. We're talking about ECTS mobilities. Implementing these short-term mobilities, for example, blended mobilities, into our curricular designs. And having said this, thank you, Nacho. The floor is all yours. I will give you the presenter rights now, so you can share your presentation.
Thank you very much, Johannes, and speakers that have preceded me. I'm going to share my screen, see if I do it correctly. I suppose I could be able. No, this is not. Yeah. Very well. I'm very glad to be just being presented by this tour d'horizon on the different works that we have been doing in the NORM project. As my colleague Johannes and Anita and Ramon mentioned, the point of departure for this project was against the landscape of mobility in Europe, which is totally different. If we compare it to today. It was before the COVID-19 that was the big event that provided the case for zero mobility, physical mobility in Europe, thanks to, as a result of the lockdown. It was at the time where Key Action 1, as we understand Key Action 1 nowadays, cover only certain kind of traditional, what we call now traditional mobilities, the semester type mobility. Semester type mobility that was defined at the time in something in between 3 months and 12 months, and with some exceptions for some universities that perhaps had terms that were shorter than 3 months. But it was based actually in an exchange program that had been designed since the very inception of the Erasmus Plus program in 1987. The basic, as you know, because most of you have been involved for some time already in how to manage, organize, and support the exchange mobility of students within the Erasmus Plus, but also within other exchange programs outside the Erasmus Plus umbrella. The basic idea was what Johannes mentioned, the idea of building up a study plan that eventually would be able to, by knowing reasonably in good terms the academic offer of the other institution, knowing the academic offer of our institution, the possibility of build up learning agreement that could be eventually be recognized in terms of the subjects, modules, or credits as defined in the learning agreement into the activities of the sending institution and the curricula and of the student participating in that exchange program. However, things have changed quite substantially since then, and provide the case for an European curricula design guide. Indeed, as Johannes mentioned, since 1987, Erasmus used to use one program that covered most of our activities when we are involved in supporting exchange mobilities for studies in Europe. It still remains that European Union flagship program, reaching a huge number of students since its creation, but stopping short, or even not only short, from what has been expected always to get at the political arena. Indeed, Erasmus Plus will continue to be, and you can see this word that have become extremely fashionable after COVID-19, will remain resilient after 2020 difficult situation. But the objectives that have been established actually have not been accomplished. Johannes mentioned that this project was designed at the time that still the objective, the threshold of the European benchmark of 20% of students in mobility established in Bucharest for 2020 remained elusive, but it was still a goal. This project was granted in 2019. Nowadays, we know that not only because COVID-19, this threshold, this aim is far from being accomplished. In the current program, besides, we have new benchmarks that was repeated. We have new benchmarks created upon those initially devised, and still we don't know how exactly we are going to accomplish them. Most of the reasons that have been important obstacles in the past to reach that European benchmark, and those that are similar to those that we are facing today. They have been described extensively, and then you will have all the deliverables of this work in the different intellectual outputs of this project soon to be published in the web of the project. These have been related, as Johannes and Ramon have mentioned, to personal factors, but also to organizational issues. At the time we were doing the research work and the surveys in intellectual output 1 and 2, long-term change for large number of students was still the average of the mobilities. But due to the logistics, housing, shortage of financial means, and other barriers like availability of language teaching mostly in English in the receiving institution, then are still those similar barriers that we have today. But one important reason, and the reason why we are today presenting this European guide, was the low participation found in the curriculum itself. In a way, we have been identifying Erasmus Plus and other programs for exchange programs connected to the internationalization of our institutions with the mobility of students in terms of the semester one. We will see that in terms of organization is perhaps the easiest because it requires some collaboration between the partner institutions, but it doesn't require an enhanced collaboration. Johannes had mentioned the case of, and I have referred to the necessity to build up a meaningful learning agreement to create the possibility of exchange for educational purposes. But that is about knowing each other. if we keep this idea that Johannes described about how to build the learning agreement in terms of pairing modules or subjects abroad with those at home, the case for the matching tool, in order to increase mobility flows that, well, normally they find obstacles in doing this pairing, we realize that however difficult that activity sometimes, however it becomes a reason for low mobility flows, we can tackle that with not that high level of collaboration. It's a matter of information. It's a matter of availability of the information of the course catalogs. It's a matter of availability of the information of the correct competences acquired by following a certain module. There was the case, as I mentioned, for the matching tool. But this is just part of the story. And a small part, the traditional one, as I said, but the important thing that we are looking at this moment today is, while covering this, which is still problematic, because there are, as our work have described very clearly, there are still obstacles to this lesser way of collaboration in order to create a mobility program. Obstacles connected to lack of information of the course catalogs, as I mentioned before, lack of information or about the potential eventual recognition of the outcomes and the credits obtained in the receiving institution, lack of availability of courses because in a language that should not be a barrier for the mobility. Even though that's not a solved problem, we are trying, one of the aims of our project was to tackle that specific aspect through the analysis we have done, and the tool to match courses. There are a number of other possibilities when discussing internally and at our institutions how to build and create meaningful possibilities for our students to go abroad or to have an international experience at home, thanks to hybrid models and so on and so forth. There are a number of possibilities that are also the subject topic covered by this guide. The main objective then is still the same for every single kind of mobility that we may structure in our institutions, to increase the number of students participating in them according to the different degrees or the different programs they participate in, according to the different partners that we have. So the main point of the guide is this one that you see now on the screen, that neither students nor staff. Today we are talking about students' mobility. And one of the main problems that we had in Erasmus Plus, for instance, is that we have been so focused on student mobility that we forget that in order to make a meaningful one, or to increase the level of participation of students, we have to involve staff as well. Staff that both teaching staff through mobility of them, or through building up virtual components together with the different partners. We will see what is the importance of that later on, but also that stuff that gives support to the possibility of creating a mobility scheme. Johannes mentioned the connection or the discussions that at the time we were preparing this project were ongoing and still are ongoing on Erasmus without paper. This is only part of the story, but we need every single leg. The Erasmus Plus program, for instance, knows that, and next to the students' mobility, they frame the mobility for staff, either for teaching or for education or for formation. But anyhow, it's something that unless we tackle that feeling both in the students and the staff, that there is no academic need for that, we will not be able to increase that levels. And this is very clear because we know that Erasmus Plus, in the overall context of all the policies and programs of the European Union, is the most socially accepted policy and program. Academically speaking, however, we are not that sure that it works. That's the reason why we are today, and we have initially devised and designed this project, because academically speaking, which is our business as higher education institutions, there is still a number of things that we can do. So, for us, a condition for increasing that mobility numbers is that mobility becomes an integral part of a curricular framework. That integral part may vary a lot. Let's put it clear from the very beginning. Integral part of the curricular framework could mean just to establish a possibility for the semester abroad in the terms we understand the traditional mobility, through creating or through entering into an interinstitutional agreement with another partner, the sort of interinstitutional agreements that we normally sign. Establish a certain number of mobilities in the field of education and so on and so forth, and then you build up, you introduce this possibility in your mobility programs offered to the students, and then, well, the idea of creating the learning agreement supporting the academic aspects of the mobility, as I described before. However, and the European Curricular Design Guide will point that points at that from the very beginning. With some of your partners, perhaps you think that the educational collaboration can go a step further, using precisely the new possibilities of mobility that we have nowadays funded through programs like Erasmus+. And this enhanced educational collaboration may open the door to integrate in a different way in the design of the curricular design of a certain program at home in your institutions, may integrate mobility in different ways than the mobility semester, the semester mobility. Even more, with some partners, perhaps not with everyone, that you signed an interinstitutional agreement for what I have described as traditional forms of mobility or types of mobility, you may begin establishing more contact to see the elements common to the way you organize and exchange mobility. Common elements that can be part of the educational components, but also the administrative structure. And then perhaps this integration eventually takes the form of a really integrated program by aiming at having a joint program that may be certified as the SO-style European degree label, which is a new coinage, a new expression used by the Commission in this way of creating new meaningful opportunities for study in Europe, or what we have already known and we know very well, which are the joint degrees, double degrees, and so on and so forth. Then, if you see that progressing possibilities to integrate mobility or to design, in a different words, to design in mobility-friendly ways a program, educational program, a degree, a bachelor degree, a master degree, the way it is structured, the doctoral programs in your institutions, by knowing that possible map and knowing yourself, your institutions, and your partners, you may begin choosing in different parts of what you offer as mobility schemes, different types of mobility with different aims. Eventually, our aim is just that for a student participating in an exchange program, full recognition, automatic recognition once agreed what should be recognized. Either if we talk about these pairing or matching subjects in a semester type mobility, or because we define a blended intensive program as part of a current module offered in our institutions, where the recognition is also automatic in the system. That is our aim when we talk about student mobility. So all these possibilities are covered by the design, the European Curricula Design Guide. And it is the aim of it to develop that concrete policy recommendations on how to design study programs in a mobility-friendly way that encourages mobility to be embedded in curricula. Embedded is a tricky word, as it is automatic recognition when we move to discuss that part of the educational component of exchange programs. But the thing is that we can embed in curricula mobility-friendly programs or mobility in different ways as I have described. Then the main aim of the guide is this, and next to that, in order to help the reader to be in a specific handbook that can help faculty deans, coordinators at the different at our different faculties, students, regulatory bodies both at the national level and also at the European level, though the competences that we know that differ. We have created in the guide also a glossary of terms to understand, to give what is commonly understood by the terms we are constantly using, from the expression mobility window to what is a semester mobility, what is a virtual component, or what can be a virtual component, what is a blended intensive program, generally speaking, what should be a blended intensive program as defined by the Erasmus Plus if you want to get the support of that funding, and so on and so forth. And also in terms of certification, recognition, and so on and so forth. Most of those terms are terms of art with a specific definition that have attached a legal implication, legal effects, like the automatic recognition of what means the European the European supplement to the diploma. Some others are yet to be defined. But what we have aimed here is that whichever option that you want to follow according to your plans to internationalize a certain degree or a faculty and so on and so forth, to have in the guide all the possibilities with the implications. Then our aim is to tell the reader that if they go for a certain program mobility, they will need to keep in mind several aspects in order to make that program working. That's the reason why next to the guide we have created a checklist of what is needed if you aim to introduce, if you aim, for instance, to create a joint degree program in a certain field, but also to the lesser integrated mobility programs or mobility schemes in less embedded forms, like the one we know, the semester mobility, but also those that require additional components like virtual components in the mobility. We have not covered in the guide, for instance, we have just focused on mobility, but no, we have not covered all the possibilities that the new technology gives us, like virtual exchange, which has been recently subject of separate call by the Erasmus Plus program. We cannot enter in empiric discussions about what means mobility, virtual exchange, or virtual mobility can be considered virtual mobility or not. Our main idea is just that by knowing very well that you have the possibility of introducing international elements in the study programs of your students that sometimes will be limited to virtual experiences, but some of the times the actual participation in face-to-face physical mobility, you will get increasing numbers of students that begin seeing that there is an academic value to everything that you have designed according to the European Curricula Design Guide. And this is extremely important because at the end of the day, when discussing about the obstacles and hurdles to mobility, we ended up discussing about the lack of finances, the problems with accommodation that Johannes mentioned, or how to be more inclusive, which is something that currently has been linked to the grants at the European level, and so on and so forth. most of these discussions, we cannot say anything at all. But what we can do something, because it's part of our business, a daily business, is how to create the perception of that academic value on these programs that we have devised. We can tackle those obstacles connected to the actual design of the program and the support in managing the flows, the required flows of the program. In doing so, we have taken into consideration what we had not at the beginning of the project, which was actually that Erasmus Plus supports now individual mobility in a different way to the old Erasmus scheme. Thinking in the possibility of more intensive collaborations between university programs to create better opportunities and better learning experience for students. Most of us, when reading a sentence like this, that is vague enough to be written and expressed by a politician, began thinking immediately in joint degrees and double degrees. That's not the point. Actually, every single possibility covered by the guide, the common element to all of them is that there is a mobility program embedded in it, or a mobility scheme to be used to enhance the educational experience of the students while they are at our universities. Indeed, the joint degree, the double degree, or if we look at that separate call within the Erasmus Plus program, which is the Erasmus Joint Master Degree, seems to be the excellent partnership that we should aim at. Immediately after, someone in your institution, particularly in these bodies that you have on accreditation of diplomas and so on and so forth, would say, hey, well, it looks fantastic, you have a very good idea, but there are many obstacles to make it happen. There are obstacles about creating joint administrative procedures, creating a joint image, creating groups of work to work together, to make that joint program working, to be sure that you have enough teachers that can teach in the common language of instruction decided for the program, and so on and so forth, and eventually the most important problem at all, how you are going to design and give the common diploma resulting from following the course or the program. So in the guide, it is covered that possibility, and using different kinds of typologies that we have now in the new Erasmus Plus program, then you can see how by increasing the flexibility, mobility formats and duration of them, you may enhance the possibilities for your students and increase the level, the number of students participating in mobility programs. But this doesn't mean that the guide aims at suggesting everyone to go for a joint degree. No, not at all. Part of the work in intellectual output 4, led by Marburg, intellectual output 3, led by Marburg, was about how to understand how mobility could be increased or improved in highly regulated fields of education, like law, medicine, education, and so on and so forth. And they discovered that, yeah, well, there is a problem. It's a national problem. It's not, as many as students at the end of the degree, they want to get in these professional colleges that they require, getting the national competences during the degree. Then mobility proved a difficult thing to tackle. But we discovered that actually it was also in the normal, non-regulated fields of education where these educational barriers or structural barriers took place. So despite the idea that we are aiming for a very exclusive system of partnership, like a joint degree, actually what we cover is everything. Then the idea of the guide is just by providing indicators on one hand that we will display, I will present later, and a checklist on the other, you realize in each of your institutions, and sometimes next to your partners, quite often if you go for more intensive educational collaboration, then you realize what it is, the possibilities of which kind of type of mobility you may use in order to create that enhanced experience for for your students. So this, besides, gives you the opportunity to rethink possibly the mobility programs that you have using long, short, continuous, or intermediate, and you see also the ICT frameworks that may facilitate international teaching and learning and online or hybrid blended mobility with high interaction level. These are the different elements that we will try to describe, that we have tried to describe in the curriculum design guide, knowing that at this very moment, the goal-oriented, flexible and scalable diversified institutional mobility policy that we cover in the guide blends very well with some of the programs that may fund it, particularly the Erasmus Plus program, and with strategies for internationalization of higher education in the European context. What means this? It does mean that current discussions about how to build the universities of the future in Europe, or how to make that European education area and its implications of higher education policy a reality, include something that we were doing in the past, but at a different level. So the guide blends very well with these aims of promoting automatic mutual recognition of higher education, but also to improve flexible formats that aim also to different other policies of the European Union. Nowadays, the possibilities given by the digital transition, so-called digital transition in higher education and also in mobility, is an element that even if we are still focusing in physical mobility, we have to keep in mind when devising kept in mind when devised and designed the guide. As such, the guide also blends well with other programs, not only with the Erasmus Plus, not only with the higher education as we understood so far, but also with other initiatives like the Digital Education Action Plan. We have not mentioned here the new, the Green Erasmus and the Green Deal as another program, another policy of the European Union, but we know that it has been understood also as increasing the virtual components of that mobility. Finally, it blends also very well with the current strategy for the universities as being exemplified in the European Universities Initiative. The idea of creating closer networks where the mobility can be enhanced, the flows of mobility of students in mobility can be increased, and where you can play with different kinds of mobility according to different levels of educational collaboration. That's key in everything that we discuss in the guide, because it covers possibilities, as I mentioned before, from non-structured educational collaboration, knowledge between the two parties by entering into the institutional agreement and understanding that it's in a certain field of education and possibly, well, it's a matter of necessity, after having checked the available courses both in the sending and the receiving and the other way around, the sending and the receiving institutions, from these less structured systems to the more structured or embedded mobility schemes in the programs, in educational programs. We know, and this is a good example, that you cannot do everything you wish. You cannot use perhaps you cannot even think in establishing every single type of mobility that now is funded by a Key Action 1 in Erasmus Plus with every single partner you have. In the case of Alcalá, we have more than 500 interinstitutional agreements, but our level of collaboration is different. So the guide, by sharing these aims at building bridges for effective European higher education cooperation, thinks that this is how Europe has been built, with double speeds, with different ways of cooperating, and so is for each institution, is for each stakeholder by considering and revising what we have published in the guide, to begin to think with whom they can do or they can establish that closer educational collaboration through different types of mobility and with whom they can keep in a certain arena of collaboration. In any case, and that's the important thing, the guide, the curriculum design guide, this European guide will cover all the different possibilities that, thanks to the new Erasmus Plus program, we have. This doesn't mean that it's limited to that. Of course, Erasmus Plus has increasingly developed what is called the international dimension of the mobility. It has done that both in the Key Action 131 and also in the former Key Action 107, now Key Action 171. Out of that, in our institutions, according to our international strategies for internationalization, we have several other programs. But eventually, most of those programs end again in the types of mobility that you will see that are at the core of the Erasmus Plus program. You may discuss about what is the length necessary for the physical component in a blended internship program. 5 days, 10 days, or wherever. 3 days. If it is less than 5 days, then you will not be able to apply for a VIP, according to the rules of the Erasmus Plus guide. This doesn't mean that you are not going to create a blended internship program with other universities outside the rules of the Erasmus Plus program. Even if you follow the rules of the Erasmus Plus program to get funding for it, or you don't follow the rules because you have a different kind of, imagine a summer school or winter school where you want to embed these blended intensive programs, the discussions about in which terms the educational collaboration should be between the partners creating that BIP are the same. In order to be successful, you need to have into account the same factors on how you are going to embed that blended internship program in your current programs to get the automatic recognition aim by when you suggest students to participate in that. If you want that blended internship program as a piloting scheme to see if the partnership between the different universities involved can grow, then you have to keep in mind the same factors about processes of common transcript of records, or administrative processes, co-design of the virtual components of the blended internship program, assessment, remotely executed or implemented on the side of the teachers, and so on and so forth. So this is the presentation of the guide in general terms, and how it has been the result of all the work done within the project in a very difficult coordinates, I would say, because everything that happened in the last 3 years, including not only the impossibility of physical mobility created by the pandemic, but also the huge changes at the political level that we are suffering at this moment, as we are discussing at this moment in our institutions. The innovation of the Erasmus Plus program and the innovation in many other European policies. So, according to the agenda, I'm quite in time to continue with the next presentation, which is now going to the practical things. If I have been able to describe before how we reach the idea of building up the European the curricular design guide, and how we have built that according to the coordinates that we were involved the last 3 years and the results we used from the work done in the different intellectual outputs, and actually position also that two intellectual outputs which are connected to the matching tool, because as I said, is not only about building up a guide to create joint programs. No, it's a guide to consider the different possibilities that we have to increase mobility in our current programs or future programs according to different factors. Sometimes, as I mentioned before, will be to continue and improving how we do things in the semester type mobility, the traditional kind of mobility, and there is the main place for the matching tool, because we know, according to this research and according to the surveys and according to the different reports prepared at the level of the Erasmus program, we know that it's still a problem thing, that institutions are facing problems in terms of eventual recognition of outcomes or creation of a meaningful learning agreement, or even in terms of motivation of the students to go abroad. We know that knowing exactly what the receiving institution can offer to our students in terms of the future transfer of credits into their curricula and eventually to get the diploma to the supplement to the diploma, the European supplement to the diploma, we know that is still a formidable obstacle. So there is a place for the matching tool, but the matching tool goes further. I mentioned before that the guide will show how it's possible to use in a creative way the different types of mobility that we have today, for instance, to get funded by the Erasmus Plus program, how to use them creatively. Imagine the case where you have a partner, where you have only the semester type mobility, you have make available the information of your course catalog to that partner, the corresponding partner have done so. Your coordinators for 2 years, they have been seeing the possibilities of matching through the tool. Your students accessing the tool, they see that possibility of matching, and eventually your coordinators realize that you are ready for a step farther or a step higher in terms of educational collaboration. And seeing the content of the different programs, the moment in the calendar, the number of students that are going, because we realize that every year increasingly are students interested in going to that destination and the other way around. Then perhaps your coordinators or other faculty that see that they are receiving very motivated students from the sending institution, and the sending institution seeing that no problem at all with the recognition, no problem with the information the students receive and the support they get by the receiving institution. Eventually, our faculty decides to co-create a blended intensive program, which is something which is a novelty to them because they were accustomed only to the semester type of mobility. So the matching tool can be also not only have a direct and immediate effect or impact in the way you do things, but also can be a tool that will help you to consider, according to the premises of our guide, other educational collaboration, other opportunities to collaborate between the two universities. So, let me see that I'm going to share again my screen, but this time with the presentation concerning the practical elements of the guide. Let me see if I have done it well. Yeah. So that's the important thing that now that everyone coming with to the guide will find. We know the reasons, the case for the European the curriculum design guide, and we know the new map that there is that new map of mobility in Europe, particularly, although, as I mentioned, this is not restricted to what we do, to the business we do within the umbrella of the Erasmus Plus program, though it's pretty much connected to it. As I can tell you this, I can tell you example of my university, and most, if not the majority of our exchange programs are canalized through our channel. The channel we use is just the Erasmus Plus program. So, which questions you should be able to answer when looking at the guide in terms of at the level, at the faculty level in your institution, or at the central level, or according to your internal structure, you come to the decision that you want to increase the mobility of students. That's something that is not in a guide. The reason why someone will go to this guide to see which are the possibilities to enter in that process is because they have realized that they want to do that. For which reason? There are many. We know that the internationalization is a common expression in every single university, in every higher education institution in Europe. It is quite unlikely that a rector or a vice rector in our institutions don't talk at least once a week about internationalization. Mobility flows are part of rankings, the indicators of rankings that our departments on rankings and promotion, they are always looking at. So these elements, though they should not be taken for granted, are in our current business, even if you belong and you work in international relations office or in admissions office or in regulatory bodies connected to accreditation processes and so on. Internationalization is a fashionable expression. So once at the internal level, your institutions have decided to increase the mobility. And they have decided that, for instance, because they went for the application for the charter, for the accreditation of the Erasmus Charter for Higher Education, and then according to the application, you have to mention elements and future indicators of how you are going to use the Erasmus Plus funding. Now back to this main area of our work in Europe, how you are going to use Erasmus Plus funding to make your institution more attractive, to improve some areas underdeveloped in your institution, to increase the number of mobility, and so on and so forth. Then you have to mention indicators. How far do you think you will be able to increase the level of students in mobility according to the Bucharest aims of 2012? 20% of mobility, which is your level of mobility at this moment? Anyhow, the way you reach the first page of the guide are threefold. There are many ways that you reach there. But once you are there, there are some questions that you should be able to answer. First, how are mobility enabling partnerships defined at my institution? Which partners do we have? Why do we have those partners? Because mobility always implies a partnership. We may know our first objective is to know ourselves very well, but then we have to know our future partners. If we are going to make a practical analysis, which is the subject of this of the guide, on how to improve that mobility flows according to the different opportunities you have. Second question. What data objects does my institution take into account for defining a partnership? That's extremely crucial. Johannes mentioned that not everyone, despite having some common language in this European education area, not everyone used that language in the same way, and not everyone used the language. We know that when talking about increasing mobility, increasing mobility flows, eventually what we are talking is about the eternal dilemma of the European Union. How to define borders and how to create doors open to those borders that are existent. We are not one obvious country. We still have our own languages. We have developed common language for improving the mobility of students for academic purposes. I still feel codes are helpful. ECTS, the European Credit System, the European Credit Transfer System, the origin of it was that. You still have your systems of how to define the workload of the student, how to define the many elements in the way you structure an educational program. But when you enter in a partnership with an institution belonging to a different country that have a different way of doing with the same business, we have accepted to use a bridge common to us, where we can translate our system into that bridge, and then the other can take the information of the bridge and translate it into their own system. But we need to know that, because it would be unlikely that we will have successful stories to tell if we don't have a common language with the other partner, if we don't know exactly what means a credit to them, if we don't know exactly what means credit mobility to them and what means credit mobility to us. This is, again, if the first question you have to answer is to know yourself, then you have to know also your future partner. And eventually, once you know yourself, once you know the future partner through the analysis of your data, including fields of education and so on and so forth, then you can enter in trying to answer what types of mobility enabling partnership does my institution have and which we can establish. This is the first decision for those that read in the guide and have we understand that they can take advantage of what we have described in the guide. The guide will help you to answer these questions in a sense, though these questions should take prior to many of the questions covered by the guide, because it is built not only on a policy analysis. It is not a theoretical work. It is the stage dress in the guide is the theoretical work against the self-assessment we propose in the guide might be conducted at your home institutions and with your partners in order to see which opportunities are best for you in terms of improving the mobility of students. So, from that point of view, the guide covers a 3-layers analysis, which try to, in a way, cover all the possibilities that we have nowadays. This doesn't mean that it's so exhaustive that everyone would find an answer to their qualms on how to improve mobility in your institution, but it's a useful Ariadne thread through which go through the labyrinth. Not of the Minotaur, but the labyrinth of internationalization through student mobility. The first logical step is something that I have already mentioned several times. Once you know yourself, you need to know who is your partner, how you can structure collaboration with your partner, and the role in this analysis has the interinstitutional agreement. This is basic because not only within the Erasmus Plus program, but in any exchange program, the support basis, the legal basis for any partnership is that sort of interinstitutional agreement. We use the expression interinstitutional agreement when talking about within partnerships within Erasmus Plus, but eventually it's mostly, even if you go for a memorandum of understanding or cooperation agreement or education agreement, the term does not change completely the subject covered by that covenant or agreement. And there are, and this is just based the first point of departure on which the cooperation with other higher institutions is going to take place. Now we know that we are in the middle, thanks to Erasmus without paper, of a huge movement of renewal of interinstitutional agreements within the Erasmus Plus program. It was the result of changing from the old program, Erasmus Plus of 2014, to the new program. We are still on there. It was a process that was less clear-cut than we expected. I believe Johannes mentioned before the changing roadmaps and milestones on the side of the Commission on this, and we still have not finished as a result of technical aspects of how to do that digitally. But still, even if you have already signed all the institutional agreements you want to sign for this program, or you plan in the future, according to your internal system, to sign new ones, you have to analyze this basic information. I'm not going to stop on this because it's just not directly connected to most of the questions covered by the guide. But there is an information about the mobilities that's important in terms of the example I gave to you before. And also the practical information about the institutions, because we know that some of the hurdles that we are not covering here, like language skills or additional requirements for mobilities, or structural elements like connected to the academic calendar or information about business, insurance, and housing, can prove to be unsurmountable obstacles to any mobility program. But it's important to remember every time that you, when discussing or considering the possibilities of introducing different kind of mobilities with a partner or just a traditional sort of mobility, that everything is going to appear in the interinstitutional agreement. So, the interinstitutional agreements can play a part in different ways, because one interinstitutional agreement is not set in stone forever, or the conditions to mobility, the conditions of the agreement established, but it can set the way to improve how things have been doing. Like the identification of the fields of education. Imagine the case that you will see in the guide of the sort of enhanced a higher level of educational cooperation, which is the definition of mobility windows in your design, in the design of the program. That mobility windows are not designed on a vacuum. No, they are connected to the partnerships that you have. If you have partners where you know that the mobility window can operate easily, then you will have to look first to the result of this assessment is that you have looked first how an interinstitutional agreement has been designed and how it has worked for, during its duration. So these are some indicators for that self-assessment that we proposed in the European Curriculum Design Guide as connected to interinstitutional agreements. I'm going to move relatively quickly over most of them because this is just the first layer of self-assessment that we propose in the European Guide. But it's important that you see that all of them are related to the aims that I have described and to the elements that have served as the material, the raw material, to design this European Curriculum Design Guide. Performance of incoming students. This indicator is something that I have mentioned before. Sometimes, just simply by seeing how a semester-type mobility works between two institutions for a while, for 2 academic years, you may see the likelihood to suggest this possibility to future students or to see other possibilities that enhance the mobility programs with that partner. In any case, that performance, for instance, will be extremely helped, the performance analysis, by the implementation of the matching tool described within the project and the prototype design within it. As study success is a ratio between the number This is rightly the normally understood between the number of credits taken and the number of credits successfully completed. If you put all the elements I have been describing and my colleagues have described before during today's session, this hurdle of students that fear that by participating in a study program, they will not finish their studies in time. For instance, because they don't get recognition of everything done abroad and they have to add a new semester to their regular studies at home. The performance of incoming students is an important indicator to see how healthy an interinstitutional agreement is and how you can improve it. The same goes for the performance of outgoing students. And also from the support and facilities at the host institution. As I mentioned, this is not something that we cover in the guide, but we hint at that in the analysis, in the self-assessment analysis based on the interinstitutional agreements that you have in terms of improving the academic, the number of students participating on mobilities. Academic quality. This is always a difficult indicator to assess, and sometimes it's just simply related to something that I mentioned before. Through the implementation of one interinstitutional agreement in a semester type or one academic year type of mobility, coordinators and faculty can realize that they can do something additional to what they are doing. But it's important also from the angle of the matching tool. Academic quality in terms of mobility is based also in the amount of information at the fingertips of the students to make the decision to participate in a study program. I'm using again the example of the semester type, what I have described as traditional kind of mobility, because it's the lower case of exchange, the one that began in 1987 and is still the one that has the lion's share possibly of our exchange programs. That academic quality in the partner, in the receiving institution, in terms of the information of the courses offered in the language that is in a certain language, when it's important that to have a common language like it is English nowadays, at least in Europe, or many other elements contained in the syllabus of each module in terms of foreseeing the eventual recognition, that speaks to the academic quality of the internship. If the students don't have information in time, if the coordinators every year have promised to get a transcript of records or to get a meaningful transcript of records with information that they can transfer into the curricula of the sending institution, eventually that partnership is dead or should be dead or should be revised. Specifically, the course catalog information, which is something that speaks for one of the most important structural barriers in this context, is something that in the self-assessment you have to look at it. And here lies, as I said before, the importance of using not just a common language like ECTS. The example I used is common language in this cacophony of different languages in Europe, but a common platform to exchange seamlessly and not with much effort, both administrative and academic effort, that information that is crucial for creating, in this case, a learning agreement. The same goes for exchange of mobility documents. Then is something that should be part of that self-assessment, because the mobility flow is not only about information, it's not only about creating a learning agreement, it's about cooperating at the level of bureaucracy to make the whole exchange happen successfully. The same fear of students of not finishing their regular studies can happen both because as a result of lack of recognition or as a result of lack of receiving a transcript of records in time, then postponing 1 year just simply by a bureaucratic obstacle. Concluding, with the self-assessment as connected to the interinstitutional agreement. We have mentioned the involvement of the institution, the possibilities to increase cooperation, the possibilities to get imagine the case that I mentioned before, if you design a mobility window that requires courses from different faculties defined differently in terms of codes of ICET codes, how a partner will help you to receive students on this connection or not. The possibilities are number in terms of involvement, as they are in terms of educational collaboration, which is what I mentioned before. The possibilities to escalate how you collaborate. This repeated. If we move now to the second level of analysis, then we move to the mobility type analysis. Informed by the data collected in that self-assessment that's connected to institutional agreements, then we can begin understanding which is the best possibility, the best possibilities we have according to a certain field of education, according to your students, to your degrees, where the students are preparing the mobility, and the possibilities offered by your partners. That means that sometimes the student mobility flows and many other elements that we have self-assessed in the first level of the assessment may help us to reconsider or to add new elements to the mobility programs that we have established in terms of increasing again that number of students in mobility. Imagine the case, for instance, of eventually, because you operate at a very good level, thanks to the sharing of the information of the course catalogs, through the matching tool, for instance, and many other things, students become more interested in that special partnership with the data receiving institution for certain field of education. If the same perception takes place on the other side of the business, on the receiving institution now as sending institution, eventually you may think, for instance, you simply increase the number of students in mobility that appears in the terms and conditions of the interinstitutional agreement. Or it might happen that you begin thinking that you may do something together, including the faculty, like participating or elaborating together courses for a summer school or winter school, or other number of possibilities. That is the importance of having a very clear mobility type analysis for the reader to see what they can do, and if they want to go for introducing new types of mobility, what they should do in terms of the indicators they have to look, and in terms of a checklist of what they have to do according to, sometimes with the Erasmus Plus, if we want to get funding from that program. The most clear example is that we should, if we really want to enhance educational collaboration through blended intensive programs, we have to define them in terms of the Erasmus Plus, at least 5 days face-to-face, and between 5 and 30 days. Because if we don't do that, eventually we will not get the funding. But in any case, you need to introduce and analyze those indicators too. Third, the definition of what is a semester. This we look at the semester mobility. This we look at the technical, from the technical part. You will see that it requires something else from the less technical part, which is how to develop the educational components that sometimes are essential to a certain type of mobility. For a semester, you don't design or co-create educational components between the two institutions in the partnership. It's just the normal one. But for a blended mobility, perhaps it's needed to develop a common virtual component to make it successful. Because after all, you want to move not only students, but also teachers. So the elements vary. So you need to have a clear definition and indicators for the self-assessment of what are the different types of mobility and how they can serve your interests and ambitions. It might be Also, the case of what I mentioned here, the description is the one according to Erasmus+, but it can be something different. In the guide, you will see clearly that distinction, one that is connected to getting the funding, and the other one which is connected just to define new different kinds, the possibilities to introduce different types of mobility if you have an external funding, not connected to Erasmus. And the same goes for the short-term doctoral mobility in terms of this example of the Erasmus Plus program. I'm going to go a little bit quicker because I'm 5 minutes to finish according to the agenda. So I will try to cover the last 3 levels of analysis that will appear in a very detailed form, both indicators and in terms of checklist for creating a self-assessment in the guide that eventually we will publish as a result of this project. As I mentioned, the third level is the educational component. Once you have analyzed the interinstitutional agreement and the partnership as such, once you have in mind a certain intention to do with some partners, and then you have checked that against the typology of mobilities you have at hand with some funding schemes covering them or not, then you have to go for the educational components, the preparation of the future learning agreements, that you need the activities of educational collaboration that you need according to the different typologies. These, the indicators, most of them have been already mentioned, and they are connected with the different types of mobility. Semester, we know that this is something that Johannes mentioned before. The idea is, well, the Commission, normally if we speak about Erasmus+, they want to introduce mobility windows where we don't need to pay everything because they understand that matching courses is always a difficult thing and provides obstacles for increasing the mobility, as we have mentioned several times. But even if you go for the more traditional pairing or matching courses between the sending institution and the host institution in terms of the learning agreement, or you are able to define mobility windows that cover just in one package the number of credits that the student has to get by participating in the study abroad or the exchange program, eventually here the collaboration in terms of educational cooperation between the different students is pretty limited. It's about information, it's about knowing sometimes, for instance, in the mobility windows, how far it's possible to design interinstitutional agreement covering different fields of education for getting the students, incoming students enrolled in different faculties, to give you an example. But the objective does not require that high level of educational cooperation. If we added something else to contribute to the possibilities and learning outcomes of the students when they are in a mobility, which is a virtual component, this normally will be defined at the receiving institution. So from this angle, even if we introduce hybrid types of mobility in the traditional semester, these hybrid elements normally they will be designed. You need to design them in terms of future recognition. So you have to speak a little bit more with your partners. Because in some places, perhaps recognition of virtual components will be an obstacle according to their national internal regulations for recognition of outcomes. But in terms of educational cooperation, should not be an enhanced activity between the partners. But this added something that the reader of the guide will see that there are some elements in the checklist that they have to be sure, which is how these virtual components, optional virtual components in a semester type mobility will affect eventual recognition between the partners. If we move to the blended mobility with short-term physical mobility, which is the novelty, par excellence of the new key action 1, then here we talk about educational cooperation in a higher level. Why? This is something that resulted of our work in this project. We have suggested, and we are going to introduce in our eventual policy recommendations, that unless because it covers also the mobility of staff, the teaching staff also needs to. And the virtual component is embedded in the physical mobility unless there is that virtual component and the general blended intensive program or the blended mobility with short-term physical mobility is co-created. It would be difficult to get the actual recognition at the end of it. I'm not going to enter in all the details of this because I'm running out of time, and sorry for that, but this should be a new level of discussions. I have used this example several times during this presentation, particularly in this sort of learning curve between partners that are used to have semester mobility type of mobilities, and then they enhance it, they enrich it by adding new possibilities that require not only an interinstitutional agreement, they will require an interinstitutional agreement, of course, but also common definitions. It's not just my courses where the students from my partner are getting enrolled, but this is something more detailed and structured. The blended mobility can be part of a given program or can be in itself a program within a school, winter school, summer school, and so on and so forth. But it can also serve at the first stage to discuss increasing the number of educational components co-created between the two institutions. And then this goes, as we'll mention later, for another level of analysis, which is just the create of a common joint program. A blended mobility with short-term physical mobility can be a joint program, a small one defined in terms of ECTS, but it can open the door for increasing the educational cooperation to bigger programs defined also in ECTS, but certified on a different way, like joint titles, double degrees, or with double degrees less, or the SOE-style European degree level. And the last one, in terms of defining cooperation, educational cooperation, would be the other possibility, novel possibility, which is for doctoral mobility. That it would depend also how in your institutions and in your countries doctoral candidates, the positions of doctoral candidates within your institutions are structured. In any case, this will imply also co-creation in terms of the activity that may lead, as in the other cases, to a joint program, for instance, co-tutel, which will be covered elsewhere in the analysis. The fourth level in this analysis is the cycle of student mobility as such, data flows and its management. This is something that I have mentioned several times during the presentation, that is just an integral part of the discussion, integral part of how to improve mobility according to the different types as the possibility of increasing educational collaboration. Unless you know how to build administratively or from the administrative point of view a blended intensive program, the best ideas will end in failure. And the last level of analysis in the guide is a certification analysis. I'm sorry that this is. And what is the certification analysis? Increasing types of mobility or the enrichment of a flexible, goal-oriented mobility in a given program, not in all programs, not with all partners, may lead eventually to create a common program that needs not only to have in mind questions about recognition, transfer of credits and diploma supplement, but also in terms of certification, in terms of joint titles, and so on and so forth. So the guide also covers the different possibilities that we have and the checklist that immediately will call the attention on which elements you need to keep in mind if you want to go for that last level. In the end, the European degree, the European Curriculum Design Guide, as I mentioned before, will cover all these possibilities. In the analysis, internal analysis, and with your partners of the different possibilities with your partners, some will go for all the levels. Some will go only for some levels. But the main thing is just to know which opportunities are in your hands to increase the number of mobilities when this is thought as part of the strategy for internationalization of your institutions, and what to do. The what to do should be in your institutions, with your internal offices, international relations offices, and many other things, and many other services that you have at your universities, but it will also with your partners. Then, if eventually you get this political will, the educational will in your staff to increase that possibilities according to the different types of mobilities with the adequate support from your administrative staff, eventually you will be able to eliminate or soften those academic and structural barriers that have been the subject of the discussion and the work and our work within the consortium, the non-consortium. Would this help increasing the mobility numbers? Perhaps we will solve or we will be able to reach that levels of mobility that were established in Bucharest and now within, for instance, the European University Initiative are even higher. Certainly not. Financial risks, accommodation problems, many other questions will always be the Damocles sword pending over our necks. But we are completely sure that by analyzing and structuring better than in the past our mobility schemes and programs, we will be able to generate a better impact of international programs, including student exchange programs, in the way we do our business, which is, after all, higher education. Thank you very much. I finished with 6, sorry for that, Johannes, 6 minutes behind schedule, but then I give you back the floor.
Thank you so much. That is a lot to digest. We have learned a lot, and let's now put our knowledge to work. So we learned about various levels or dimensions of a successful curricular design that is friendly towards international mobility. Let's now have a look at the various levels in a sort of group work following and the indicators, right? Let's put the indicators to a test. The group at a group work. The group work scenario, quite simply, based on the input, based on everything that Nacho just presented, we prepare a new program which we want to be mobility friendly. And the task is to define a specific goal and consider the parameters of a potential negotiation or roadmap towards a successful program. Now, we sent this out to everyone who registered. I hope you have this at hand. Our colleague Franziska will put us into breakout sessions. I'd say let's come back here in 15 minutes. But Franz, before you put us into the sessions, or we have to enter the sessions ourselves, right? Just an example. So we want to define a goal of a negotiation. So we want to establish, as an example, a co-tutel program, right? Something that I, as the University of Marburg, for example, cannot negotiate is my doctoral degree regulations on a local level, so what my university proposes, as well as a state level. So there is some state legislation concerning doctoral degrees. So that is something that I cannot negotiate about. What I can negotiate about, for example, would be, well, who are the committee members, right? How many committee members are there? Does it have to be meet on physical, or could it be a committee that meets virtually? So the defense, for example, the disputation of the PhD thesis, does it have to be physical? Could some members of the committee participate online? So, and then there are issues that could be difficult in terms of a code-to-tell program, for example. Looking at funding, right? Who funds the program? Who funds travel of the professors who are part of the examination committees? So these are the categories that we want to complete based on the dimensions and levels of the curricular design guide, partnership analysis, mobility type, data flows, certification LDS, and the indicators that Nacho just provided. Don't forget, internationalization is a cross-sectional task. So many of us are international relations officers. In this exercise, we want to go beyond our traditional role and look at the roles or the needs that others might have who actually themselves design the programs or those who audit a program at our institution.